Hello, friends. Today I want to go a bit deeper into the life and work in Japan, particularly of Richard Henry Brunton, the civil engineer and the father of Japanese lighthouses. Now, I've already talked about this book um, published this year, A Man of Resolve, Richard Henry Brunton. Um, and I've done a book review which I've uploaded to my channel, and I'll put a link to it at the end of this video for those who've not seen it. But today, I want to base my talk on this book, which is by Brunton himself. It's Richard Henry Brunton Building Japan. Um, can you see that? I hope so. 1868 to 1876, which is when he was active in Japan. Um, now, this is Brunton in his own words, so it's a little bit different from Jeff Goulnick's biography. But I always like to hear historical figures in their own words. I mean, a lot of my Ernest Sato research is based on that concept, directly publishing the Sato papers. So anyway, let's take a look at the PDF of this book. In fact, this is just a few, well, about 37 pages, is it? I think, yes. It's not the whole book. I could have bought the whole book as an ebook, but that's quite expensive. And I don't really want to read the whole thing anyway, so this seems like a good compromise. So I shall work from this with your permission or not. Hope you don't mind anyway. Look at that. That's a nice bridge that somebody's built. Presumably Brunton designed that. Um, and we're just scrolling through the front pages here. Uh, Intentionally left blank. All right, so this includes an introduction and notes by Sir Hugh Cortazzi, who kindly did the introduction to one of my Sato books, his diaries for 1806, what was it, 1870 to 1883, I think it was. So Hugh wrote the introduction for that. That's the only one he did for me. Of course, he passed away some 3 or 4 years ago, I think now. Anyway, great loss to Anglo-Japanese scholarship and relations. And a very nice man. Okay, so introduction and notes by Sir Hugh, which I'm going to read in his honor. In addition to the 1906 introductory postscript and notes by William Elliott Griffis. This was published by Routledge, first published by Japan Library in 1991. There's the Routledge addresses, Taylor and Francis Group. Yeah, so it was first published. The book I've recently received, or in fact, I received it today, a second-hand hardcover. Can you just about see that? I got from Iseido Booksellers in Tokyo. They're a very good bookseller for second-hand books in English. Strongly recommend them. I used to use them when I was full-time professor at QTech, Kyushu Institute of Technology, and I bought books with my research budget from them. They used to send me a great catalogue once a year, very interesting catalogue with lots of rather expensive books, which I couldn't really afford. But this one was very reasonable. I think it was, well, something like $15 and then $15 for the postage. So I ordered it this week. Anyway, so here we've got the contents of the book. So we've got publisher's note, list of illustrations, preface by Hidenobu. Is that Hidenobu, or it should be probably Hidenobu, I should think. Takahide, mayor of the city of Yokohama. Sounds like a misprint. Let me just have a look in the original book. See if, yeah, it's not Hidenobu, it's Hidenobu. Hidenobu. I've never heard of a Japanese man called Hidenobu. All right, so Hidenobu Takahide, Mayor, City of Yokohama. Introduction by Sir Hugh Cortazzi. Introduction by William Elliott Griffis, Brunton, the Lighthouse Builder. And then Brunton's own book, his text. 1, My Appointment to Japan. 2, The First Telegraph in Japan. 3, Laying Out a New Settlement. 4, Water and Light. 5, Building Iron Bridges. 6, Osaka, an Interned City. 7, Taming the Rivers. 8, The Gold Mines of Sado. 9, The Pioneer Railway in the Far East. 10, Maps, Surveys and Engineering Education. 11, The New Coinage. 12, The Great Fire in Tokyo. 13, The Craze for Steamers. 14, Location of the Lighthouses. 15, In the Historic Port of Nagasaki. 16, Buying a Lighthouse Tender. 17, My Visit to Satsuma. 18, The American Warship Oneida. 19, The Purchase of the Tabor. I think that's how it's pronounced, Tabor. 20, The Jealous Japanese. 21, The Dockyard at Yokosuka. 22, The Expedition to Formosa, or Taiwan as we know it. 23, Vicissitudes. 24, Necessity, the Mother of Invention. 25, Building Ships. 26, Audience of the Emperor. We would now say with the Emperor, as Sir Hugh once told me, or pointed out to me. Number 27, The Great Embassy to the Treaty Powers. 28, Home Again with the Japanese in England. 29, Japanese Petroleum. 30, Women's Education in Japan. 31, The Japanese in Bad Temper. I wonder what that's about. Possibly a row with Brunton, I suppose. 32, The Yokohama Harbour Scheme. 33, Maintaining Discipline. 34, Keeping Up the Standard. 35, The Ryukyu Islands. That's Okinawa. Ryukyu. 36, Personal Judgments. Postscript by William Elliott Griffis. Notes by William Elliott Griffis. Notes by Sir Hugh Cortazzi. So we've got plenty of notes. Appendix 1, Scheme for a Water Supply to Yokohama. Appendix 2, Lighting. Appendix 3, Letters to the Editor, the Japan Weekly Mail. Appendix 4, Notes taken during a visit to Okinawa Shima, the island of Okinawa. The Lochu Islands, or that's just another way of saying Ryukyu, before they were able to pronounce it properly. Foreigners, they said Lochu, I think. Or possibly it's got something to do with the Chinese pronunciation, I'm not quite sure. Appendix 5, Constructive Art in Japan, Paper 1. Appendix 6, Constructive Art in Japan, Paper 2. Appendix 7, The Japan Lights and Index. So that's it. Right, here's the publisher's note. So the text of Brunton's work printed here is as edited around 1906 by the American teacher William Elliott Griffis, who, in the postscript, points out that the text available for publication is his condensed and annotated version of the original Brunton manuscript. Furthermore, Griffis admits to leaving out the complete first half of Brunton's record, which he describes as historical in form, and presumably, given all the existing histories in print at the time, was not considered relevant nor a commercial proposition. It is therefore not at all clear how much rewriting Griffis has done, nor how much of the original Brunton text has been omitted, which, as far as is known, no longer exists. Griffis naturally edited the work according to American spelling and stylistic conventions, as well as perceived market opportunity, given Japan's high profile worldwide after her success in the Russo-Japanese War of 1904-5. Since Brunton would have written in British English, we have tried to honour the style of the original author and return to British English spelling. Oh, good for you. In the same way, preparing the book for an American audience, Griffis changed all Brunton's references to costs from pounds sterling to American dollars, except on a few occasions when he failed to do so. Here we have not attempted to impose any standardization and left the figures as given by Griffis. On the other hand, to mark the fact that this is a period work, published in its original form for the first time, the 19th century spelling conventions for the names of Japanese towns and cities, for example, Tokyo, Tokio for Tokyo, Kioto for Kyoto have been retained, as well as the extensive use of capital letters and the convention for expressing the date. However, the then common practice of accenting the live E as in Kobe with an acute E acute and sake with an E acute has not been followed. Footnotes. The text references to the original Griffis footnotes are printed in bold, heavier type. The text references to the footnotes by Hugh Cortazzi are written in Roman, lighter type. Jolly good. Interesting stuff. Right, got a page left blank intentionally. Then there's an interesting list of illustrations following page 86. Plate 1, Plan of the Settlement of Yokohama, prepared by R.H. Brunton, 1870. Plate 2, Print of Yokohama showing first railway station and the experimental lighthouse. Plate 3, 1870 print celebrating the Yoshida Bridge. Plate 4, early photograph of Brunton's iron lattice bridge, Yoshida Bridge. Plate 5, Nihon Odori, Nihon Boulevard. Oh, there's an E missing there, isn't there, in Boulevard? I think. Oops, sorry. Yokohama, designed by Brunton in the 1870s. Plate 6, Brunton, photographed in London about 1868, circa 1868. Plate 7, the Lighthouse Department, Yokohama. Plate 8, Brunton's residence in the grounds of the Yokohama Lighthouse Department. Plate 9, Kashinosaki Lighthouse, completed August 1870. Plate 10, Mikimoto Lighthouse, completed January 1871. Plate 11, Irozaki Lighthouse, completed 1871. Plate 12, Tsurugisaki Lighthouse, completed March 1871. Plate 13, Iesaki Lighthouse, completed May 1871. I think that's the one in Moji Ward, Kee-tah-kew-shoo, which we normally we start with an H, not a Y, Hesaki, but Iesaki. Plate 14, Tsurushima Lighthouse, completed July 1873. Plate 15, Wada no Misaki Lighthouse, completed May 1871. That's Kobe, isn't it? Plate 16, Sugashima Lighthouse, completed July 1873. Plate 17, Inubosaki Lighthouse, completed November 1874. Ah, okay. Plate 18, Hesaki Lighthouse. That's the one in Kee-tah-kew-shoo. Sorry, so Iesaki and Hesaki. Iesaki must be somewhere else. Hesaki Lighthouse, completed April 1872. Plate 19, Tsunoshima, Brunton reference Kadoshima Lighthouse, commenced August 1873. That's quite an interesting one. Within the city limits of Shimonoseki, it's an island, Tsunoshima, and that's quite a tall lighthouse. I've been there a couple of times, and it also has museum in what was the lighthouse keeper's house, which is quite interesting. A Scottish lighthouse keeper and his wife were there was the first lighthouse keeper. Plate 20, Noshiap Lighthouse, completed August 1872. Plate 21, Shirasu Lighthouse, completed March 1872. I have a feeling that's also Kee-tah-kew-shoo, funnily enough. Plate 22, Iwoshima Lighthouse, completed January 1872. Plate 23, Mutsure Lighthouse, completed December 1871. Plate 24, Eboshishima Lighthouse, completed August 1875. Plate 25, Sata no Misaki Lighthouse, completed December 1871. Plate 26, Nebeshima Lighthouse, completed February 1873. Plate 27, Anorisaki, Brunton refers to Matoya Lighthouse, completed September 1872. These are different readings of the kanji, of course. Brunton's reading. Plate 28, the lighthouse tender Tabor, a powerful vessel of about 750 tons. I have a feeling Ernest Sato also travelled on that at one point. Pretty sure. Okay. So here's the preface by Who's this by? I think that's by, yeah, okay, it's by Hidenobu Takahide, Dr. Hidenobu Takahide, Doctor of Engineering and Mayor of the city of Yokohama in the summer of 1991. Right, so here we go. British civil engineer Richard Henry Brunton, 1841 to 1901, came to Yokohama in 1868, the first year of the Meiji era. And shortly after, the port of Yokohama was opened to foreign trade. He was the first of a number of so-called Oyatoi Gaijin, foreign employees. We normally say Oyatoi Gaikokujin, I think, nowadays, contracted to the Meiji government, which was seeking to quickly modernize Japan by introducing foreign technology. So far, so good. R.H. Brunton's work was to construct lighthouses throughout Japan based on treaties concluded between the then defunct Tokugawa shogunate and the American and European governments. To promote foreign trade, it was necessary to build lighthouses for the safe navigation of vessels that entered and departed from the Japanese ports that had already been opened. Brunton's efforts were outstanding. He constructed more than 30 lighthouses in important spots throughout Japan during his rather short 8-year stay until his departure from Japan in 1876. Being among the first foreign professionals to be employed by the Meiji government, he inevitably ran into many difficulties in his relations with Japanese government officials who were drawn exclusively from the class-conscious warrior samurai tradition. Brunton had been engaged in railway construction during his earlier days in Great Britain and had established a broad civil engineering career. Thus, he was asked for technical advice on railway construction as well as telecommunications, harbour works, and many other projects being undertaken by the Meiji government. In particular, because the lighthouse department to which Brunton was appointed was located in Yokohama, the city became center stage for modern Western engineering transplanted to Japan by Brunton. In the Central Park of Yokohama City, we can still see much of Brunton's legacy today in roads, parks, drainage systems, and bridges, and we are proud to recognize them as Japan's firsts. This year, that's 1991, marks the 150th anniversary of Brunton's birth. On this occasion, in recognition of his great contributions that made Yokohama a modern city, we decided to organize various Brunton anniversary events in cooperation with the Japan Society of Civil Engineers, the Yokohama Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and many other interested parties. Our plan includes a series of programs both in Japan and Great Britain, highlighting Brunton's achievements. In his later years, Brunton, known as the father of modern engineering in Japan, wrote his memoirs about his experiences in Japan. We feel it most meaningful and an honor for us to be able to assist in the publication of this valuable record in England this year as part of our Brunton Memorial events. I didn't know he was called the father of modern engineering in Japan. I've heard of him as the father of lighthouses, Japanese lighthouses, but I don't know. It sounds like it's slightly overclaiming for him. I mean, Henry Dyer was the principal of the Imperial College of Engineering, for example. Anyway, in closing, I must state my deep gratitude for the courtesy and support of former British Ambassador to Japan, Sir Hugh Cortazzi, and many others involved in this project. Hidenobu Takahide, Doctor of Engineering, Mayor, City of Yokohama, summer 1991. And now we get into the real meat of things. Introduction by Hugh Cortazzi. Richard Henry Brunton was born in Fetteresso, Kincardineshire, Scotland, in December 1841. His father was a captain in the Royal Navy. After attending private schools in Scotland, Brunton in 1856 began his articles as an engineering student under Mr. P.D. Brown in Aberdeen. In 1858, he was transferred to the supervision of Mr. John Willett, also of Aberdeen. He completed his articles in 1860 and remained in Mr. Willett's employ, working on the construction of various railways in the Scottish Highlands. In 1864, he moved to London and was employed first on parliamentary work in connection with the London and South Western Railway. In 1866, he became principal assistant to a Mr. Henry Bolden and was involved in work for the Midland and other railways. In February 1868, Brunton, who became an associate of the Institution of Civil Engineers in April that year, was appointed on the recommendation of Messrs. David and Thomas Stevenson of the Scottish Lighthouse Board as chief engineer to the Lighthouse Department of the Japanese government. He arrived in Japan in August 1868 and, except for a brief period of home leave, remained there until 1876. While in Japan, his main responsibility was for the construction of lighthouses, but he also became involved with a wide variety of civil engineering projects. On his return to Britain, Brunton was appointed in 1878 manager of Young's Paraffin Oil Company in Glasgow. In 1881, he bought a manufacturing business producing architectural ornaments and practiced in London as an architect and engineer. He died in London on the 24th of April, 1901. To appreciate Brunton's achievements in Japan, it is necessary to understand something of the background. When the ships of the US Navy under the command of Commodore Perry appeared off the coasts of Japan in 1853, the country had been virtually closed from the rest of the world for over 2 centuries. The shogunate, or bakufu, the military feudal government of Japan in Edo, the modern Tokyo, was under the nominal leadership of the Tokugawa family, who provided the shogun. The regime had become ossified and was incapable of initiating radical changes or responding positively to the potential threat of foreign domination. The first treaty of peace and amity with the United States, obtained by Commodore Perry in 1854, which was followed by a similar treaty with Britain, did little more than open a small window for contacts with the outside world. The foreign powers were not satisfied, and in 1858, Townsend Harris, the first US Consul General in Japan, managed to conclude a commercial treaty which provided for the development of trade and the establishment of a number of treaty ports where foreign merchants could reside. Lord Elgin from Britain followed up on the American success and concluded a similar treaty between Britain and Japan. By the treaties of 1858, the Japanese were forced to grant extraterritorial rights to foreign governments who thus had jurisdiction over their own nationals in the treaty ports. The most important of these treaty ports in the 1860s was Yokohama, although there were also small settlements in Nagasaki, Kyushu, and Hakodate, Hokkaido. Kobe was opened for trade from the 1st of January 1868 and Niigata in 1869. Niigata on the Japan Sea coast. A supplementary convention was concluded in 1866, which stipulated that the Japanese government were to provide such lights, buoys, or beacons as may be necessary to render secure the navigation of the approaches to the treaty ports. This was the basis for Brunton's employment in Japan. In the 1860s, when the United States was preoccupied by the Civil War, Britain displaced the United States as the leading foreign power in relations with Japan. The British merchants quickly became predominant in Yokohama. The settlement in those early days, suggested a western frontier town. The Japanese authorities were unable to provide adequate security against anti-foreign elements, and a British garrison had to be established. Murders and violence were frequent, especially in the first half of the 1860s. Housing and sanitation were at best primitive. The merchants were tough and often unscrupulous. Relations between the British minister at the legation, which was located for part of the time in Edo, and the community in Yokohama were bad. The Tokugawa shogunate's power over Japan's feudal magnates was undermined by their inability to cope with the foreigners. Their vacillations and prevarications incensed the foreign envoys and infuriated the anti-foreign elements which were predominant especially in the so-called outer domains, those of the Tozama daimyo, who were not direct vassals of the Tokugawa. The two most important of these were Satsuma, the modern Kagoshima in southern Kyushu, and Choshu, now part of Yamaguchi Prefecture. The murder in 1862 by samurai from Satsuma of a British merchant from Shanghai, Charles Richardson, at Namamugi near Yokohama on the Tokaido, the main route from Edo, Tokyo to Kyoto, led to British demands for reparation and punishment of the murderers. When Satsuma refused to comply with these demands and the Bakufu were unable to enforce their authority, a British fleet bombarded Kagoshima. Satsuma claimed a moral victory when the fleet suffered losses and withdrew, but the young samurai leaders in Satsuma recognized the realities of British power, and enmity was translated into friendship, while Satsuma strengthened its forces for the imminent struggle with the Tokugawa. it took somewhat longer for Choshu to recognize where their best interests lay. In 1864, the Straits of Shimonoseki having been closed to foreign shipping by the Choshu authorities, a Western naval force bombarded the Choshu batteries, which were later destroyed by a British landing party. Very close to where I live now in Kee-tah-kew-shoo, on the other side of the strait, in fact. Kanmon Strait. By 1867, the anti-Tokugawa forces had gained the upper hand, and the last of the Tokugawa shoguns agreed to resign, but the shogun's allies refused to accept what they saw as a humiliation at the hands of the outer fiefs, and civil war ensued in 1868. The Tokugawa forces in Edo gave in, and by the end of 1868 the civil war was virtually over, although resistance continued into 1869 in Hokkaido. The new regime, in which samurai from Satsuma and Choshu were dominant, restored nominal power to the emperor and moved the imperial capital from Kyoto to Edo, which was renamed Tokyo. This marked the inauguration in early 1868 of the so-called Meiji, meaning enlightened government, restoration, which was a major turning point in Japanese history. The young samurai from the outer fiefs who dominated the new regime were determined to revise the unequal treaties with their provisions for extraterritoriality. Japan must above all avoid the fate of China, where the Western powers were grabbing concessions. They wanted to make Japan a significant power in the Far East. To achieve these objectives, Japan had to be dragged as quickly as possible from a semi-medieval form of feudalism into the world of the 19th century. Radical changes had to be made in forms of government. The rigid class structure of the Tokugawa Japan, dividing the people into samurai, farmers, artisans, and merchants, where commerce was a despised occupation, had to be destroyed. A modern economic structure and an industrial base had to be built. Above all, Japanese must be educated to compete on terms of equality with the West. Japan's own resources were very limited. In a few of the fiefs, a rudimentary start had been made in building a few industrial enterprises. Education had been almost entirely Confucian, but literacy rates were comparatively high by 19th century standards. Loyalty was regarded as the highest virtue. Strict discipline was maintained, and Japanese were generally dedicated and hard-working. However, revolution in attitudes and the radical reforms which were necessary could not be achieved easily. Opposition to change culminated in the Satsuma Rebellion of 1877. The Bakufu had realized that Japan needed foreign help in the modernization process and took steps to employ some foreign experts. The new leaders intensified the process. Technical experts and teachers were sought from Europe and from the USA. These were the so-called Oyatoi Gaijin or Gaikokujin, or foreign employees, not employers. The British minister to Japan from 1865 to 1883 was Sir Harry Parkes. Domineering and arrogant, he was a determined upholder of British interests. In the run-up to the Restoration, he had leaned towards the anti-Tokugawa forces. After the Restoration, he did his best to ensure that British influence was maximized by ensuring that British candidates for posts with the new regime were preferred. Partly at least as a result of his efforts, the British accounted for half of all foreign nationals employed by the Meiji government. Until the ministry was abolished in 1885, two-thirds of all foreign employees in Japan were hired by the Ministry of Public Works, the Kobusho. In order to attract the necessary experts, the Japanese had to pay comparatively high salaries, often more than double the average in the USA and Europe. Understandably, as soon as Japanese replacements could be found and trained, the foreigners were replaced. So the number of foreign employees was greatest in the early years after the Restoration. A total of some 3,000 foreigners were employed by the Japanese government during this period. Despite the high salaries paid, the job of the foreign employee was rarely an easy one. There was inevitably a serious linguistic problem. The cultural barrier presented even greater difficulties to both the foreign employees and their Japanese employers. The foreign employees objected to interference and dictation from Japanese authorities who failed to understand the nature of the problems to be tackled. The Japanese, for their part, resented the often condescending and arrogant attitude of some of the foreign employees who were the creatures of their age and who were not always as sensitive as they should have been to Japanese susceptibilities. Despite these difficulties, the foreign experts made a very significant contribution to the modernization of Japan. Among the many British experts and teachers invited to Japan, Richard Henry Brunton was outstanding. His achievements in the creation of the Japanese lighthouse and lifeboat service was of great importance for the safety of life at sea and navigation in Japanese waters. This facilitated the expansion of trade with Japan and benefited foreign countries as well as Japan. His help in starting the first Japanese telegraph and with plans for the building of railways in Japan was significant for the development of communications in Japan. His proposals for better access to the ports of Osaka and Niigata and for improvements at Yokohama were not unfortunately carried out during his time in Japan, but his involvement with the construction of the first iron bridge in Yokohama, together with his plans for the provision of water, drainage, and lighting in Yokohama, make him one of the great pioneers of civil engineering in Japan. I think that iron bridge is on the front cover of this book. First iron bridge in Yokohama. Brunton's story is a revealing one. He encountered numerous difficulties and frustrations during his service in Japan. He was a man of principle who was not prepared to accept compromises which he felt betrayed those principles. He was a difficult man to work for and to have as a subordinate. He was very determined and obstinate. He was also intolerant and impatient and sometimes arrogant. But he was very energetic, conscientious, courageous, and tough. Furthermore, he had vision and was an eminently practical civil engineer. Brunton summarized his difficulties with other foreign employees and with his Japanese colleagues and assistants in these words. The conscientious and efficient conduct of work in Japan was a task which presented the most perplexing difficulties. There, i.e., the foreign employees, high pay, their different mode of living, their want of disciplinary power, and the knowledge that foreigners were more or less indispensable to the Japanese rendered their European assistants most intractable and difficult to deal with. Resignation, insubordination, absence from duty, drunkenness, and other aberrations of conduct among Europeans employed in the Japanese government service became frequent and distressing. On the other hand, the semi-ignorance of the native servants of the emperor and the self-esteem, untrustworthiness, craftiness, and corruption of the Japanese underlings rendered cooperation by an honourable foreigner with them extremely irritating. Brunton's assessment of the Japanese at that time was shared by other observers. One of his subordinates, unpublished and unsigned manuscript, a copy of which the writer received from Dr. Wallace, was patronizing in a manner typical of the less attractive features of our Victorian forebears. He declared, "Taking them all together, I suppose they are the most advanced of all half-civilized nations, and they might be much more advanced if they could get quit of their self-conceit, for that will be a very great drawback to their advancement in all civilized customs. They, as a race, are particularly well pleased with themselves. They have the Chinese idea that they are superior in most everything to the whole world, and they look upon all foreigners as their inferiors." Brunton decided that he had two choices. The first choice, which promised quietude and repose, was to let things take their course, give advice when asked for, feeling undisturbed if this was neglected, and to become imbued with the Oriental estimation of the valuelessness of time, allowing nothing that hinders progress to perturb or annoy. Such was the method in the 70s by which the European could become a favourite with his Japanese employer. The second choice was to insist on a due enforcement of his directions. Brunton noted that this line was almost certain to create friction. He commented that the Japanese had made up their minds to make what use they could of their foreign servants, but in no case to have them become masters or to invest them with any power. They hold them in the position of advisors or instructors only, without the authority to direct. The Japanese attitude is understandable, but we can also sympathize with Brunton's determination that, at whatever personal discomfort or self-sacrifice, I should assert my position as the responsible conductor of operations. He had to confess that he met with only partial success. Shortly before he died, Brunton prepared an account of his service in Japan under the title The Awakening of a Nation, being a description of the entry of Japan into the Sisterhood of Nations, with an elucidation of the character of the people from personal experience. The manuscript was bought from Brunton's widow for £20 by William Elliott Griffis, 1843 to 1928. That's almost the same as Ernest Sato, who died in 1929, born 1843. Excuse me. Griffis was an American teacher clergyman and author of many books on Japan, including The Mikado's Empire, 1876. He had been employed in Japan between 1870 and 1874 and had known Brunton. Griffis worked on the manuscript and tried without success to get it published. He gave it the title Pioneer Engineering in Japan, a record of work in helping to relay the foundation of Japanese Empire, 1868 to 1876. On Griffis' death, the manuscript with other Griffis papers was left to Rutger University, New Brunswick, New Jersey, from which Griffis had graduated. Other scholars have worked on the manuscript since. They include Miss Stoper, Mr. Frederick Weldon, and Edward R. Beecham, I suppose that is, or Beauchamp if you're going French. A Japanese version was published in 1986 under the title Oyatoi Gaijin no Mita Kindai Nihon by Shintaro Tokuriki. The text of Brunton's work, printed here, is as edited by Griffis. Griffis' notes and introduction have also been included as far as possible. I have added some further notes to help the modern reader. The appendices include the texts of articles and papers by Brunton which are only available to students with access to specialist libraries. The text of Brunton's lecture in 1876 to the Institution of Civil Engineers on the subject of the Japan Lights is also included, with an abstract of the discussion upon the paper, although this was republished as an appendix to The Life and Times of the Illustrious Captain Brown, A Chronicle of the Sea and of Japan's Emergence as a World Power, by Louis Bush in 1969. Voyagers Press Limited, Tokyo, and the Charles E. Tuttle Company, Tokyo and Rutland, Vermont. The spelling of place names used in the Brunton manuscript has been retained. Brunton, for example, used the spelling Tokyo, T-O-K-I-O, for Tokyo, K-I-O-T-O for Kyoto, Y-E-D-O for Edo, the modern Tokyo. The writers and publishers wish to record their sincere thanks to Dr. Hidenobu Takahide, Mayor of Yokohama, to Mr. Yutaka Ueno, Chairman of the Yokohama Chamber of Commerce, of the Brunton Memorial Committee, and of Ueno Unyu Shokai, to all members of the committee and to the officials of the Yokohama City Government involved in this project for their generous support and assistance, which has enabled this historically important work to be published. They also wish to acknowledge the support of the Japan Society, London. Finally, we would like to acknowledge the role of Mr. Hiroshi Isohata of the NKK Corporation, who, as a result of a personal interest in early British engineers while attached to his company's London office in the 1980s, discovered that Richard Brunton and his work in Japan had been largely forgotten in Britain. Familiar story for me. Ernest Sato was a rather similar case. Mr. Isohata's quest to rediscover Brunton ultimately led to the 1991 Brunton celebrations, marking the 150th anniversary of his birth. So that's in 2041, it will be 200 years, won't it, since his birth. I wonder what celebrations there might be then. Selected bibliography. So Pat Barr, The Coming of the Barbarians, Macmillan, London, 1967. Pat Barr, The Deer Cry Pavilion, that's the Rokumeikan in Japanese. Macmillan, London, 1968. W.G. Beasley, The Meiji Restoration, Stanford University Press, California, 1972. W.G., that's William G. Beasley, The Rise of Modern Japan, Charles Tuttle, Tokyo, 1990. Olive Checkland, Britain's Encounter with Meiji Japan, 1868 to 1912, Macmillan, London, 1989. Cortazzi, Dr. Willis in Japan, British Medical Pioneer, 1862 to 1877, Athlone, London, 1985. Cortazzi, edited Mitford's Japan, The Memoirs and Recollections, 1866 to 1906, of Algernon Bertram Mitford, the First Lord Redesdale, Athlone, London, 1985. Cortazzi, Victorians in Japan, in and around the treaty ports, Athlone, London, 1987. Fox, Grace, Britain and Japan, 1858 to 1883, Clarendon Press, Oxford, 1969. Jones, H.J., Live Machines Hired Foreigners in Meiji Japan, Paul Norbury Publications, Folkestone, co-published with the University of British Columbia Press, Vancouver, 1980. Pedler, Neil, The Imported Pioneers, Westerners Who Helped Build Modern Japan, Japan Library Limited, Folkestone, 1990. And next we go on to the Introductory by William Elliott Griffis, Brunton, the Lighthouse Builder. When in 1866, after a century and a half of interior intellectual preparation, awakening Japan called for help, England responded nobly. One of the grandest instances in history of the Macedonian cry, "Come over and help us," was met by a most generous British response in brain, in heart, in character, in industry. Having in the 17th century given Will Adams the shipbuilder, Saris the navigator, and Cox the trader, she kept up even a nobler succession in the century of steam and electricity. Besides a body of promising young students, fresh from the universities, whose names, Mitford, Sato, Aston, and others, shine like stars in the bright sky of achievement, the Queen's government sent its ablest servant, Sir Harry Parkes, who, educated from boyhood in China, knew well the history of Japan. Penetrating beyond the impudent forefront of sham and hoary deceit in Yedo, he saw the rising sun of the coming new Japan before it emerged above the horizon. Its rays had already struck the white peaks of recovered ancient history. They were soon to illuminate the path of the future. Parkes saw and endured when to many other men there was darkness with no promise. With all his fiery soul, Sir Harry threw himself into the struggle, seized opportunity by its foremost hair, and wrestled in manful grip until victory was won. He himself told me the story of how, on arriving in Japan in June 1865, in succession to Sir Rutherford Alcock, he went at once to Satsuma, that storage battery of forceful Japan, and at possible risk of life, found out who was the true sovereign of Japan and where the line of the future lay. On his initiative and direct suggestion, British capitalists loaned money to finance the new ventures such as the Mint, railway, and other public works of the quickly formed Mikado's government of 1868. For years, his resistless, that's probably restless, I think, his resistless energy, urged the Japanese in Tokyo onward to new horizons of vision and vaster issues of action. Especially was he strenuous in persuading them to discard Oriental suspicion, keep promises, abandon pagan bigotry, insular narrowness, and barbarous practices, and to carry to completion grand resolves. It was Sir Harry Parkes, chief in foresight, vigour, and originality, who, even before the Mikado's government was formed in Kyoto in 1868, secured the new agreement of 1866, which supplemented and completed that made in the Townshend-Harris Treaty of 1858, that had opened the 5 ports to foreign trade and residence. The stipulation of 1866 called for the lighting of the coast, the paving, draining, and lighting of the new settlements, and the general adjustments of a modern commercial civilization to a nation in a state of medieval hermitage. Night and day, year in and year out, Sir Harry championed reform, fought the battles in council, and backed ever with vigilant eye and cheering word Mr. R. H. Brunton, the man who lighted the coasts of Japan. This enterprise was his own child, and so Sir Harry called it. As passionately eager and earnest as a mother, he watched and served at the cradle of the young enterprise. Yet even under the new government, during the first decade of its existence, the habits of ages of officialdom in Japan, much like that which still curses Russia, could not be changed in a day. Dishonesty, peculation, the wanton pride of the strutting creature dressed in brief authority, disdain of inferiors, contempt of the man who was educated to work with his hands, adherence to old methods of routine, and impotent fear and often spiteful jealousy of the alien, too frequently marked the average man in office. Fed from the public crib, the underling usually owed his appointment to the instincts of clanship, political patronage, or the accidents of birth, rank, or following, rather than to character or fitness. The spirit of graft was everywhere. Wet hands in bran was the popular proverb applied to the greedy office holder. I speak from 4 years, 1870 to 1874, of personal experience of the time, for I served the Mikado's or imperial government of Japan when it was but an infant of days. Wet hands in bran. Perhaps that's a Japanese expression translated. I'm not sure. Against the abominable and wasteful systems then in vogue, When the Japanese ship of state was overloaded with hangers-on and office holders, who must needs be parasites on the treasury, while the number wanting to get into office nearly swamped the vessel, none fought more bravely than the new native leaders. These men trained in the Oyomei philosophy, which sets morality first and joins action to knowledge, persevered for honesty and economy. They introduced public budgets and systematic bookkeeping, reduced the number of paid officials to about one-tenth the ancient number. They assured steady progress through economy and reform. No harder work was that of Okuma, Okubo, Ito, and Inoue than that of honest Brunton. One of the men who helped mightily by word and voice, by pen and petition, by firm resistance to dishonest or truculent officialism, and who in his life and work gave unforgotten lessons of honour, integrity, and honest work, was Mr. Richard Henry Brunton, son of Captain Brunton, R.N., Royal Navy, known also as a writer of sea stories, his sister being the mother of Edmund Yates, editor and novelist. The aunt of Captain Brunton was the Countess of Craven. Born in Aberdeenshire in December 1841 and educated at private schools in Scotland, R.H. Brunton had nearly 10 years' practical experience as an engineer in railway survey and building in various parts of Great Britain. Railway survey and building. Of a thoroughly practical mind and well trained for his future work, he was appointed lighthouse engineer for Japan at the age of 27 in April 1868. By abilities and temperament, Mr. Brunton was admirably fitted to do the work in Japan which he fulfilled so well and the story of which he has told so clearly. Brunton hardly saw the better side of Japanese character. His contact was with the old Japan, scarcely emerged from feudalism, in which the merchant and trader had no social position and were as dirt under the samurai's foot. Feudal ideas had ruled for 700 years, breeding an almost inconceivable pride in the men who paid no taxes or tolls, strutted about in silk and inspired terror with their swords, keeping down the common people as masters above serfs. Another reason for official conceit was that while the mechanic was honoured above the trader and the farmer was higher socially than the artisan, yet anything like technical labour, apart from the making of swords or works of taste or art, was despised. Admirable carpenters and workers in the lines of stone and metal for native needs there were in abundance, but builders in the large sense, blacksmiths, plumbers, glassmakers, opticians, and men especially skilled in the trades necessary to modern machinery, scarcely existed. Nor could the needs of commerce and the country, shrouded at night in darkness, await the slow process of training native artisans. It was the old world of Japan, very much like that of feudal Europe, in which, despite the long peace and an industrialism peculiar to the hermit and island people, there was little at hand to aid the European master of lights. Brunton came to build lighthouses. Pressing necessities compelled him to design, build, launch and equip ships, to make bridges, project railways, transform swampy land into a modern city, pave, drain and light new settlements, and when cargoes of machinery were wrecked in the ocean, to assemble and set up the lampposts of the sea for the guidance of navigators by making lighthouses out of ships' lenses and American locomotive headlights. The new Japan that at Yokosuka would build and launch on 15th of November 1906 a battleship of 19,000 tons owes much to the man who trained some of her first modern mechanics and built her first lightships. Brunton, when his work was done, had audience of the Emperor, a banquet and present in money, but he was never decorated. This may have been because the Bureau of Decorations, which showers its favours even on obscure petty attendants upon political envoys and missions, had not then been formed. One wonders also whether the Japanese ever decorate their critics, to whom they owe so much. Praise and flattery undoubtedly have cheered and helped this most interesting people of Asia, but it is no less certain that intelligent and friendly criticism has stimulated them even more. The feverish haste of the first generation of the Japanese people, whose eyes were opening to the wonder world of modern machinery, inventions and harnessed force, was often as comical as distressing in its manifestations. Glee and childish delight were often suddenly changed to sorrow and disaster. Wreck, explosion, poisoning, disease, and mutilation forced them to realize the might of evil in untamed energies, of the nature of which they were so profoundly ignorant. It took them long to realize the necessity of scientific training and preparation to master the dragon on whose back they would ride. Brunton tells more than one comical incident of this sort in his fascinating narrative. On the other hand, it was not very easy for Europeans and Americans, whose conceit quite equals the Asiatics, and who came with preconceived ideas about Orientals, to realize the temper of the Japanese. Few foreigners in the 70s, apart from a handful of discerning scholars, had any idea of the century or more of interior intellectual preparation in Japan for meeting the needs confronting the 20th century. That's few foreigners in the 70s, that's the 1870s, isn't it? Very few Occidentals to this day, despite Japan's vantage in arms on sea and land against China and Russia, are acquainted with Bushido or know anything of the course of philosophy as expounded and exemplified by wise and good men in Japan, which armed them to meet the problems of a readjustment of ideals in civilization. From the very first, though clearly seeing the need of radical reform and the desertion of traditional Orientalism, the Japanese leaders determined to give their foreign yatoi, or hired foreign servants, liberal wages but not a shred of power. Most fortunately for their sound political training and happily for their real and ultimate success, but for 30 years until 1897, most galling to their pride, the Japanese were not allowed in the treaties to govern foreigners resident on their soil or in their seaports. Nor did they gain full sovereignty and equality before the nations until Great Britain, under Lord Salisbury's government, became the bold and magnanimous leader in this act of justice. Yes, okay. It was the previous Liberal government under which the extraterritoriality was abolished in 1894, as a matter of fact, but anyway. In this jealousy and vigilant guarding against any holding of power by their salaried foreign servants, were the Japanese any different from British or American patriots? Surely not. Besides, these Mikado reverences, now exultant in national unity, had during the ages enough of usurpers, of tycoonery, 1184 to 1868, of power holders, and of encroachments on the emperor's prerogative and on national sovereignty. If they were sometimes strenuous, and even, as it appeared, through over-officious underlings offensive, it must be said that they were no more severe against foreign servants than they were against their own people. Let the instant jealousy in Tokyo of local authorities in 1870, the abolition of feudalism in 1871, to both of which incidents I was witness, the putting down of local reaction and insurrections, and finally the suppression of the great uprising of 1877, that's the Satsuma Rebellion, or Satsuma Sensō, at so awful a cost of blood and treasure, prove this. Even-handed was Japanese justice in its unquailing resolve to possess full sovereignty. Tycoonism had cursed their country long enough, nor had the behavior or political policy of Europeans in Asia inclined the Japanese to confidence in foreigners. Even more, perhaps, were they anxious not only to command success in this their vast venture, but to deserve it. Nevertheless, for their dishonourable secrecy, past or present, we make no plea. Honest Brunton was no more irritated than was honest Townsend Harris. The love of truth, for its own sake, is still Japan's most crying need. Faithfulness to contract is still the exotic virtue which her sons in trade and commerce need to cultivate. Brunton's own pronounced limitations appear in his own story and need not be enlarged on. He was a man of conscience who was impatient with anything but good work. He may have been a severe disciplinarian, but that was what both his employers and his workmen needed. Happily also he had noble men in high office to reinforce his reasonable demands. Sanjo, Iwakura, Kido, Terashima, Sano, Okuma, Ito, and others. I knew them all, and noble characters they are and were. I knew Brunton too during 4 of his years in Japan, when we were fellow servants of the Mikado, the emperor. In a large sense, Japan is the pupil of the English-speaking nations. The line of work done and influence generated by Great Britain and the United States is long and honourable. In the full result, we see that each atom's force moves the light-poised universe. From Will Adams, normally we say William Adams these days, to Prince Arthur, who girded the Japanese emperor with the Order of the Garter and hung the Mikado's silken sun flag in Windsor Castle, the line is a noble one. Will Adams, Saris, Cox were English, then followed the hundreds of American whale hunters. Yet the Scotsman cannot be left out. How odd that Ranald MacDonald, half Chinook Indian, whose father was a Hudson's Bay Scotsman, the first in the 40s to be set voluntarily adrift and ashore in Japan, should be the first teacher of English. So it was. He trained the interpreters to use the tongue of the mother country and the Great Republic. It was MacDonald's telling about and making possible Japanese knowledge of inventions such as steamships, railways, and telegraphs that kindled the curiosity of the Japanese to know and possess. Their opportunity came in March 1854 after Commodore M.C. Perry, Matthew Calbraith Perry, formerly Chief Officer of the United States Lighthouse Service, had made the treaty. On the Strand at Yokohama, where now stand the United States Consulate and Union Church, what may be called the first industrial exposition in Japan was held and the presents put on exhibition. An American baby railway with engine, tender, passenger car and rails complete and in operation under engineers Gay and Danby carried one fat Japanese passenger on the roof. A telegraph manufactured by Messrs. Draper and Williams, the wires duly set up on poles, sent messages in English, Dutch and Japanese. Firearms, lifeboats, balances, grain measures, agricultural implements, maps, dictionaries, etc., etc., completed the exhibition and tally of gifts. 14 years later, Brunton came to turn toys into realities and advance the kindergarten to a university. He found Japan very much as England was when Will Adams left it, but is it too much to say that during the Meiji period, 1868 to 1906, plus, in fact, 1912, Japan has progressed in material civilization as much as has England since the days of Elizabeth. Yeah, I suppose this was written in 1906, so that's why he's written 1906 plus there, not knowing when it would end. And now we have a little bit of the main text by Brunton himself. Building Japan 1868 to 1876 by Richard Henry Brunton, also titled The Awakening of a Nation, being a description of the entry of Japan into the sisterhood of nations with an elucidation of the character of the people from personal experience. This was Brunton's original title. And then Pioneer Engineering in Japan, a record of the work in helping to relay the foundation of Japanese Empire, 1868 to 1876, is the title given by Griffis. And there's a photograph of Brunton in his later years by Maule and Fox of Piccadilly, London. That's a nice photograph. Professional photographers, no doubt. Okay, so here we go. Not much left to read before this preview runs out. Okay, here we go. Chapter 1, My Appointment to Japan. One of the first acts of the British minister, Sir Harry Parkes, on his arrival in Japan in 1865 was the conclusion of a convention supplementary to the then existing treaties, which made provision for various requirements necessary to the safety and well-being of Europeans and Americans. This stipulated that the Japanese government shall provide all the ports open to foreign trade with such lights, buoys, or beacons as may be necessary to render secure the navigation of the approaches to said ports. He pressed the ministers in Yedo to give the latter clause their attention at the earliest opportunity. By diligent inquiry, he obtained from the captains of the warships of various nationalities their opinions as to the best position for their buoys, lights, and lighthouses. On the 17th of November 1866, he sent these to the Yedo government with an explanatory dispatch. Yedo or Edo, I suppose. Yeah, should really be Edo. but with a Y. So to this, the shogun's ministers replied on the 7th of December, 1866. It is impossible to decide where the lighthouses should be erected until accurate inquiry shall have been made, but in the meantime we intend to procure the required apparatus. 3 lights have already been ordered from France. For the other 8, we ask your kind offices with Her Britannic Majesty's government in order to get the apparatus through them. We shall give orders about the purchase money as soon as estimates are made out. Sir Harry Parkes, having conveyed to Lord Stanley, then Foreign Secretary in London, the desire of the Japanese government, he, Lord Stanley, laid the matter before the Board of Trade, telling that department the Foreign Office concurred in Sir Harry Parkes' wish that the apparatus for 8 lights be procured and sent off with as little delay as possible. The matter was the subject of considerable discussion between the Board of Trade and Trinity House, both departments agreeing that it was premature to obtain apparatus before a proper lighthouse service had been organised. So Trinity House is the lighthouse authority for England and Wales. It was finally agreed in June 1867 to refer the whole business to Messrs. D&T Stevenson, engineers, to the Scottish Lighthouse Board, Edinburgh, which the Scottish Lighthouse Board is the Scottish equivalent of Trinity House. The Foreign Office in London received in August 1867 a further dispatch from Sir Harry Parkes requesting that the apparatus for 5 more lights, making 13 in all, be dispatched, but as no money had yet been received, instructions were given that no expense should be incurred until Sir Harry Parkes reported on this matter. The difficulty was removed in December by the receipt from the British Minister of a bill on the Bank of England for £10,729 and a promise of another similar sum in 3 months' time. In the accompanying dispatch, he gave some further information regarding the positions selected for the lights and stated that a mixed commission of naval officers, in which the Japanese would join, had been appointed to fully consider the question. The report of this body, organised in Japan, having been received on the 14th of February 1868, Messrs. Stevenson proceeded to construct the apparatus required. The fact of Japan's being subject to violent earthquake shocks raised a great sense of difficulty. The means thought necessary by them to avoid damage from seismic disturbances had the unfortunate effect of considerably lessening the efficiency of the apparatus designed for Japan. Metal reflectors were adopted instead of the much more powerful glass lenses, and the lanterns were made lower than usual, thus preventing their proper ventilation. A device was adopted of placing the apparatus on a table which rested on balls, making a break in the rigidity of the structure, or what was termed an aseismatic joint, but which was an entire failure in practice. These precautions were in truth entirely unnecessary, as precisely similar lanterns and apparatus are erected in Europe and have since been established in Japan by me without their being damaged by earthquake shocks. Me, Brunton, that is, of course. In reference to the effect of subterranean disturbances on such buildings as lighthouses, it is somewhat curious to know that the slight elasticity of the materials of which they are constructed entirely absorbs the motion of the foundations by the time it reaches the summit. Messrs. Stevenson, in their report to the Board of Trade on this matter, said, "It is evident that any lateral motion of the earth on which a building rests must be communicated to the foundations of the structure, and thence through all the rigid and unyielding material of which it is composed to its very summit, where the violence of the shock will be aggravated by the greater elevation of the building above the source of motion." Precisely the reverse of this occurs actually, and Messrs. Stevenson, accomplished and learned as they were, came to a wholly erroneous conclusion. I had been on the balcony of a brick lighthouse 80 feet from the ground and had seen people immediately below me rush from their houses in panic on account of an earthquake shock, which I did not feel in the least. While the foundations vibrated, the summit remained perfectly quiescent, owing to the elasticity of the brickwork of the tower. The Board of Trade wrote further to Messrs. Stevenson, placing in their hands the selection of suitable persons to undertake the design and construction of the lighthouses and the introduction of a lighthouse service in Japan. It continued, "If you cannot get engineers who have been trained to lighthouse service, as the numbers of these is small, The Board of Trade thinks an active and intelligent engineer with a general knowledge of his profession would soon, under your training, acquire such knowledge in these matters as would be sufficient. When he is selected, he and his assistants should proceed as soon as possible to Japan and visit the sites proposed for the lights, design the buildings, and send home sufficient plans and data to enable you to design and construct the apparatus. It would also be very essential that one or two experienced lightkeepers should accompany the engineers. A copy of the terms offered by the Japanese government is enclosed for your information. The Messrs. Stevenson, considering that I fulfilled the requirements, recommended me to the Board of Trade, and I received the appointment on the 24th of February 1868. I at once entered upon a course of study of lighthouse work in Messrs. Stevenson's office in Edinburgh, and also visited many lighthouses and lightships at different points along the coasts of the United Kingdom, obtaining by these means a practical knowledge of their details and working. Accompanied by two assistant engineers, Messrs. Blundell and McVean, I left, that's M-A-C large V-E-A-N, I left Southampton on the 13th of June 1868 and arrived in Yokohama on the 8th of August 1868. Right, and I'm going to stop the share here. That's it. That's the extract which I'm going to read. For the rest of it, you can always obtain a copy of the book yourself. I don't think I'm going to read any more. I'm not planning to anyway. We'll see how it goes. All right, so thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed that. I certainly did. And see you on the next one. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you so much. Bye now.